We are back with South Carolina Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace and Democratic California Congressman Ro Khanna. Together, they launched the Congressional Bipartisan Affordable Child Care Caucus, that's a mouthful, to deal with the child care cliff that is barreling down the pike. And I want to get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about politics. Congresswoman, President Trump is now facing 4 indictments, and yet he is still the overwhelming favorite to win the Republican nomination. Can your party win the presidency if he's the nominee?
Well, I think both sides are going to have to work hard to win next year. I talked to a lot of voters that are frustrated with both the Republican and Democrat Party. Both parties have put us on the spending cliff. You talk about child care cliff, which we'll talk about in a moment, but both parties have contributed to the inflation that we have today, the out-of-control spending, the debt ceiling that's going to add almost $20 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years. And I think both parties are going to have to make a strong case next year, regardless of who the nominee is. But you know, we'll see what voters decide next year.
You think Trump is a good messenger for that
He's
case?
running away with the nomination process now. We're still pretty far out, but he just raised over $7 million after the 4th indictment. So voters will get a say. I know that in my district and in my state, he's the standard bearer for the nomination right now.
Congressman Khanna, you said back in April that you felt that the White House was being too overprotective of the president, that it basically wasn't letting him get out there enough and be his authentic self. Do you feel that top aides in the White House got that message?
I think they do. The president has a great story to tell. He's bringing back manufacturing in Ohio, $20 billion in Ohio of new industry. He's focused on the working class. I was actually just in South Carolina yesterday with Bishop Green at AME Church, and the faith community has a lot of support for him. He's a better politician than anyone who works for him. Let him be out there.
Congresswoman Mace, you are pro-life, but you've also said your party's too extreme on abortion. And on the debate stage the other night, many of the candidates put their support behind a national abortion ban at 15 weeks, perhaps even earlier. Your fellow South Carolinian, Nikki Haley, was not among them. She said that that's unrealistic. But do you think that position is going to hold up well with the GOP primary electorate?
Well, certainly every candidate talked about being pro-life and what their limits may or may not be. But the only candidate on the stage that talked about how we should protect women and not demonize them was Nikki Haley. And that is a message that we have to carry through. We have to be pro-woman and pro-life. You cannot go after women and attack them because they make a choice that you don't like or do not agree with, because it's a very sensitive subject right now. We want to show that we are going to protect women who've been raped, girls who are victims of incest. We want to make sure that every woman in this country, regardless of where she lives or how much money she makes, that she has access to birth control. Those are the kinds of things, and we're going to talk about child care in a minute, but those are the kinds of things that really matter to women, and we have to show that we care. And I do want to add that I know that you were praising President Biden, the story that he has to tell, but the story he won't tell is a story about his family's business. He has lied every single time he's been asked about his family's business. He's lied about his involvement. He had a pseudonym. Like if you've done everything above board, why is there the need to lie for it? That is a story that I want to hear. That is a story that every American deserves to hear.
If I could just respond to that. Representative Mace and I agree on a lot of things, but this president has shown integrity for 40 years. He has been completely transparent. He has allowed the law enforcement agencies to take their hold without interfering, and I think the American people will see that.
Well, when we come back, we're going to get to a topic you both do agree on, and that's child care. We're going to take a quick break, but more with Congresswoman Mace, and Congressman Khanna on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Nancy Cordes in for Margaret today, and we are back with Republican Nancy Mace and Democrat Ro Khanna. And the two of you are here because the U.S. is facing a so-called child care cliff that most parents probably didn't know about. On September 30th, just a little over a month from now, $40 billion worth of pandemic-era funding for the child care industry is set to expire, and without it, up to 70,000 child care facilities could close, and an estimated 3.2 million children could lose access to child care. These numbers are really frightening. What can the two of you do about it? And how quickly can you get legislation together so that Congress could consider it before the deadline?
Well, it's staggering, the challenge before us. And Congressman Khanna and I, we've been good friends. We've been great lawmakers together. We've started a child care caucus. Our approaches may be different from time to time on different issues, but our goals are always the same. And these are issues that parents, especially moms, that they care about and we have to address. From the perspective that I'm looking at, you know, we talk about 4-year-old pre-K. We talk about making sure that parents have the freedom and the resources to have childcare options, affordable childcare options. I approach it from a less government regulation standpoint. We have some really crazy regulations in this country. Some places say you have to have a 4-year college degree. Well, that certainly makes it harder to find childcare workers, the increases in cost because of it. Other places say, well, if you're certified in one state, it's not reciprocal in another. And it's just, you know, having some of those approaches that can be easy to fix, fast to fix, not controversial, that can pass out of a Republican-controlled House, Democrat-controlled Senate, and get to a Democrat president's desk to be signed into law. That's what we've got to be working on.
So what do the two of you agree on?
Well, first of all, as divided as we are as a country, 86% of Americans believe that we need more support for affordable childcare. This is something that unifies Americans. We have agreement on more training for childcare workers, paying them more and having more flexibility. We have an agreement on some support, government policy support for childcare. The average cost of a family for childcare is $10,000 a year. And 85% of women say that they can't work because of childcare issues if they're leaving the workforce. So we need a short-term solution, which is continuation of some of the grants and funding, the Child Care Stabilization Act, so we don't have this cliff and that the president signs. And then we need a long-term solution to reduce the cost to families.
Experts say doing that alone would cost $16 billion. Congresswoman, you spoke earlier about the fact that you feel that both President Trump and President Biden presided over too much spending. But a lot of the solutions here, experts say, cost money. Universal pre-K, fully funding the Child Care Development Fund, subsidizing child care for low-income families. What could you live with? And what do you think you could convince fellow Republicans to get on board for?
Well, I actually think it's less government, not more, that's getting in the way of this. We saw in December of 2018 when the Azar report came through, making recommendations to states about healthcare policy and certificate of need. The same kind of thing could be said for what are some of the easy, low-hanging fruit regulations that we can roll back or eradicate or recommend go away.
Do you think rolling back regulations alone, though, can really get at the problem?
It's a good start because right now we're going to have a very difficult time with the appropriations process because of the amount of spending that's going on, because of the additional supplementals. What are some of the small parts that will make a big difference in a mom's life? And that is one thing that I think a lot of us can agree on. It's not going to be easy. We do some large comprehensive spending package. It's going to have difficulty going through. So I'm looking for the small parts, big difference here policy-wise.
This is an investment that is pro-economic growth. I mean, businesses are losing billions of dollars because we don't have people in the workforce. So it pays for itself. And then you look at the funding, you're talking about less than 1% of the defense budget. We're one of the only countries that is putting $10,000 of burden on ordinary families just to take care of their kid. It's pro-family, it's pro-economic growth, and we should have a consensus in this country to have the government make a difference here.
We can incentivize businesses too, and then make sure that parents have the money to be able to afford childcare. Less taxes would be great.
It is so important because we've seen study after study that shows that early childhood education makes such a huge difference in outcomes later in life. So we really hope you're successful. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Congressman Khanna, appreciate it, and appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. This Monday marks the 60th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech that he made at the 1963 March on Washington.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Yesterday, thousands marched to honor the anniversary, a continuation of Dr. King's dream with many echoes of the past and concerns about the challenges facing the civil rights movement today. Among those who spoke, Dr. King's granddaughter, Yolanda King.
60 years ago, Dr. King urged us to struggle against the triple evils of racism, poverty, and bigotry. Today, racism is still with us. Poverty is still with us. And now gun violence has come for our places of worship, our schools, and our shopping centers.
A powerful message. We'll discuss that with our political panel. Joining us now, Robert Costa is our chief election and campaign correspondent. David Becker is our CBS News election law contributor. And we're also joined by congressional correspondents Scott McFarlane and Nicole Killian, a double billing. Thanks to all of you for being here. What prescient words by the granddaughter of Martin Luther King just a few hours before that shooting, talking about racially animated shootings taking place across the country. Nicole, here we are 60 years later. Still a lot of challenges.
Yeah, really striking. Of course, that was King's granddaughter. We also heard from Martin Luther King III, Dr. King's son, and King's wife. But, really being out there on the Mall yesterday, 60 years later, it was palpable the amount of frustration and concern there is 60 years later. We talk about how far we have come as a country, and yet for many, particularly in the African-American community, there's a sense that we're still fighting the same battles, whether that's issues of hate crimes and racial violence, whether that's the issue of the rollback of affirmative action, voting rights. So those were some of the concerns articulated at the march yesterday, and also a call to action to continue to keep fighting some of these issues so that one day Dr. King's dream can be realized. That certainly was the message expressed.
A call to action earlier in the show today by former Vice President Mike Pence as well. Robert, I want to talk to you about the former president, President Trump, who is now, he's been booked. He's got a mugshot. He's raising a lot of money using that mugshot. What can you tell us about the legal strategy that his team has right now, particularly after he has changed his legal team in the Atlanta case?
Good to be with you. He has shaken up his legal team in Georgia. What to watch now is the difference between his strategy and the strategy of his co-defendants in this Georgia case, a sprawling prosecution using RICO, racketeering charges, to get this large group of defendants together. Kenneth Chesborough, who authored a memo suggesting alternate electors should be organized by Trump people, he is pushing for a speedy trial. So is Sidney Powell, another co-defendant, who infamously urged Trump to use the government to seize voting machines in the weeks after the 2020 election. But Trump himself is not pushing for a speedy trial because it could have political complications based on our reporting here at CBS News. He could be called as a witness during the fall, just as debates are heating up and the primaries and caucuses loom on the horizon. What you're also watching in Georgia right now is the push by Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, to have this trial move from being a Georgia case at the state Fulton County level to being a federal case. So there are many dynamics at play, multiple legal fronts, all as the political battleground also unfolds.
David, you're a lawyer. Robert just mentioned these co-defendants who are looking for a speedy trial. Why would they want a speedy trial? Why would they want their lawyers to have less time to prepare for this?
Well, they might feel that they already know the facts of this case and they're prepared to go to trial. There might be a variety of tactical reasons they might be moving in that way. And the court's ultimately going to have to decide how to sever all of these defendants and place them into different court cases at different times. Or they could ultimately all be tried together as well if there's some way to reconcile that. But that's something that the lawyers and the clients are obviously discussing and trying to figure out. And this is where we're really going to see the tension between the defendants. These defendants aren't all unified in their claims, and some of them may do better if others of them do worse. And so we're going to see that played out over the next several months as these tactical considerations are made.
We know that Donald Trump does not want a speedy trial in this case or any of the cases. In fact, in D.C. tomorrow, there's going to be a hearing about one of his federal cases where his lawyers have pushed to have the trial in 2026. Are they going to be successful with that motion, Scott?
We will find out tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. The judge in Washington, D.C. determines the trial date. And this is a Mars and Venus type of world. The prosecution wants it January 2nd. And as you mentioned, Trump's team wants it 2026. There are some reasons for optimism for Jack Smith going into this hearing. First of all, the early hearings in this case have moved crisply. They've had a quick schedule, and the judge has met all the early deadlines. And the judge has said, if Donald Trump continues with vitriolic social media posts, she's inclined to move the trial date earlier to avoid tainting the jury pool. And there's also the other matter of there are many other cases going on, and this schedule's getting clogged quickly. A January or early 2024 trial might suit some purposes. And Nancy, by so many accounts, this case, the one in D.C., is built for efficiency.
I want to ask you, Nicole, about the vitriolic social media posts that Scott just eloquently described. The judge the DA rather, in Atlanta has a different bond agreement with Donald Trump than with any of his other co-defendants. Basically, he has to refrain from attacking fellow witnesses, defendants, on social media or anywhere else. Based on what we know of Donald Trump, which is that he attacks lots of people all the time on social media, how likely is it that he is going to live up to that agreement?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, we also know that he's very verbose on the campaign trail and doesn't really hold back when it comes to going after the prosecutors in this case, but he does have to be very careful. We know that he has a new counsel in Georgia. I would imagine maybe conversations would be had about those parameters to reaffirm them, but certainly the fact that the former president turned around and put his mugshot on social media in such a short period of time, raised some $7.1 million off of that, shows that, you know, he is trying to capitalize off of this case. So it's certainly likely he could go after some of these witnesses, continue to go after prosecutors, but if he's being smart about it and listening to his counsel, hopefully he won't.
A lot of people wondering why a billionaire would have to go through a bail bondsman to post a $200,000 bail.
Well, this is a case where Trump is just trying to get his bearings now in Georgia. He got rid of his lawyer, Drew Finley. But the political consequences of all this, they're watching Trump get a bail bondsman in Georgia. The rest of the field, I was in Milwaukee this week covering the debate, and they're just wondering, is there ever a moment where this all becomes too much? For now, Republican voters are rallying behind Trump. They're buying his mugshot on coffee cups or on T-shirts. But the Republican race, and I was hearing this from candidates and their top strategists out in Milwaukee this week, they're saying that down the line, this could become such a burden on Trump's time, on his political energy, that maybe they start to break through. That's why they're not going at him directly in most cases. You heard some criticism, of course, from Vice President Pence, former Vice President Pence, and former Governor Christie in your conversations today. But beyond those two, they're really hovering around Trump's candidacy, trying to build their own message should there ever be a collapse with Trump. But as we know with the Republican Party, it might never come. They might always stick by Trump.
Certainly gets difficult to schedule campaign rallies if you're expected in court every other day. David, I want to go big picture here because you are an election law expert. And I'm just wondering, because you speak to secretaries of state and election officials in various states all the time, how do they feel now that the former president, many of his aides, have actually been charged with crimes connected to the 2020 election, which, as we know, was not rife with fraud, as the former president continues to argue?
Yeah, it's 1,027 days since that November 2020 election, the most scrutinized election in American history, with more paper ballots, audits, recounts, more pre-election litigation, more post-election litigation confirming the results than ever before. And election officials are still, to this day, almost 3 years after that, having to debunk lies about that election, having to defend their own patriotism, their own service to our country, playing an endless game of whack-a-mole. But I think they are seeing an accountability coming to those who have spread those lies for so long. It's not just the criminal cases. It's also the civil defamation case against Fox News. It's also the disbarment proceedings against people like John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani. There is a sense that accountability is coming, and they want this to play out according to how the legal system is supposed to work. And it is working that way right now. And so what we hope to see is that there is a cooling down, because right now there are tens of millions of Americans who still believe that Republicans and Democrats are conspiring to steal elections, and that's just false, and we know it's false.
A lot of election workers who got death threats, who continue to get death threats because of some of the things that people are saying about the election. David Becker, Robert Costa, Nicole Killian, Scott McFarlane, thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Russia's investigative committee confirmed today that the remains of Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin have been positively identified, along with the 9 others who died in a plane crash last week. We're joined by Fiona Hill, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a former White House Russia expert. Good morning, Fiona. Thank you so much for being here. So, Russian President Vladimir Putin claims he had nothing to do with this. Is there anyone in the diplomatic community who believes that?
I doubt it. And look, I think what we can certainly say is he didn't order it not to happen, because there are plenty of people who were painting a target on Prigozhin's back. The system itself expected him to be taken out of the picture in some fashion. I guess it was a question about what the method would be. And in fact, I think over the last 2 months there's been more shock, not just internationally, but also domestically, based on source reporting, that the fact that nothing had happened to Prigozhin and that he was allowed to walk around as if he hadn't indeed perpetrated a putsch exactly 2 months ago.
You know, usually Putin's enemies tend to get poisoned or pushed out windows or shot. Why go to the trouble of bombing an airplane?
Well, we don't know exactly how the aircraft was brought down yet, but I guess we'll find out more as things go along. I mean, I'm sure, again, that the Russian government, the Kremlin, will accuse all kinds of other people about carrying out this act if it's seen to be the result of an explosive device, for example. But it's so dramatic, it's so spectacular that, of course, one has to ask whether this was done for just the demonstrative effect of it. And we have had some mysterious plane crashes in the past, taking down Russian leaders. There was a very famous general, Alexander Lebed, for example, who died in a helicopter crash. So it's not something that is unheard of. And in other settings as well, of course, we've had Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, where there have been the loss of key people in plane crashes. So I think this is par for the course, unfortunately.
And there is some symmetry, isn't there, to Prigozhin's dash to Moscow in that aborted mutiny when the Wagner Group brought down several Russian aircraft.
Exactly. So this is also part of that idea of he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, an eye for an eye, the vengeance factor. It's baked into the system. There was a lot of clamour from the uniformed military and especially the Air Force for some kind of retribution for this, whether it was in a legal form. But look, he took down a proportional number of people in a Russian military aircraft, as you've just said here. So again, there is a symmetry and a symbolism in all of this that is inescapable in the Russian domestic context, as well as for the rest of us watching it from the outside.
The Wagner Group has been so pivotal for the Russian military in the war in Ukraine. Now there are reports that the Russian government is requiring Wagner fighters to sign loyalty oaths. What is this going to mean, the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin? What will it mean for the war in Ukraine?
Well, I don't think it'll actually mean anything significant for the war in Ukraine in terms of the military campaign itself. We were already seeing that Wagner was being pulled out or was pulling out after the actions in Bakhmut, where they were in the thick of the fighting there in that city that, of course, was so much of the focus of the carnage of the war over the last several months. But it was already a precipitating factor in all of this series of events over the last 2 months. The idea that the Wagner Group were going to be dismantled and reincorporated, or incorporated for the first time, rather, into the Russian military. And that was one of the factors that Prigozhin himself was citing as a reason for him making his march on Moscow. He didn't want to have his guys put under the command of the central Russian military. So I think, what we can see from all of this is that Wagner was pretty crucial for these early stages, this first couple of parts of the campaign in Ukraine. And now the Russian government and Putin wants to have more centralized control. He gave Wagner a long leash, and Prigozhin clearly took that leash far too far.
Mm-hmm. You're such a close study of Vladimir Putin. You've sat across the table from him. How should we think about his power in Russia now, after this likely assassination? There was a period of time after Prigozhin made that dash to Moscow where it seemed like elites, commentators in Russia felt more comfortable speaking out against Putin, against the war. He appeared to be weak. How does his standing look to you now?
Well, and not only were other commentators speaking up, but Prigozhin himself said this war was a mistake. But it was basically he was acting because he wanted to make sure that the war was won, and that was kind of part of the theme of his revolt. Now, other commentators, as you rightly said, including some senior generals, have been literally bashed back and put out of the picture for saying the same kinds of things. What Putin is saying with this assassination, whether he actually carried out or not, the message is going to be very clearly transmitted to everybody. No speaking out now, buckle down, everyone getting behind this campaign in Ukraine. That's why I say I don't think it's really going to change the way that the Russians are approaching this. And there is no room whatsoever for disloyalty. One of the things that Putin said that was very notable when the mutiny, the putsch was happening 2 months ago, is that the traitors who carry this out will have an inevitable punishment. We've seen an inevitable death as a result of this that everyone was foretold. I mean, we've all been expecting something like this for the last 2 months. The message to the whole system is don't try anything. And even don't criticize, I would say, at this particular point, because we've seen so much action against people who have been speaking out.
And Prigozhin may not be the last to be targeted. Fiona Hill, Russia expert, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And that's it for us. Thank you for watching. For Face the Nation, I'm Nancy Cordes. Have a good day.